Hello, and welcome to the next installment of Warhammer 40k for Dummies. This is part 2, where we're going to be looking at Chaos and the Warp, as well as the Horus heresy. Now, a few things I want to mention just before we start to really dive into this. I could speak about this stuff for hours on end, especially the Horus heresy. It is, without a doubt, the most significant event to happen to the Imperium of Man under the rule of the Emperor. It is a huge reason for the makeup of the Astartes now, the intense religious zealotry of the current Imperium, and how it reached its current state of total decay, mistrust, xenophobia, and all-around fear. Okay? So, we don't have time to speak for hours about the Horus heresy, but what I'm going to try and do is just hit on the very, very key points and try and show why it is the Imperium is the way it is today because of that incident. Okay? So we're going to start with the Warp, we're going to move on to Chaos, and then we're going to hit on the Horus heresy. Okay? As always, at the end of the video, I'll explain more where you can see if you want to get more in-depth into these topics. I'll have posts to or I should say links to other YouTubers down below where you can see a lot more in-depth about the specifics of Chaos and the Warp, as well as the Horus heresy. So let's dive right into it. So, to start, what is the Warp? So, the Warp, or sometimes known as the Immaterium, is a reflection of the material world. A good way to think of it is almost kind of like the Upside Down from Stranger Things, if you've ever seen that. It is just beyond the veil that separates the material from the immaterial. Right? Now, even though I said think of it as in Stranger Things, that's not to say that if you're in your house right now and you went into the Warp, you would be in your house, but just in a twisted version. Not quite. They call it the Immaterium for a reason, right? It's called that because there isn't really much to grab onto or to see, right? It is the realm of demons, where the Chaos Gods reside, and it is also where all Psykers in the Imperium and throughout the galaxy draw on their power, is that of the Warp. And we'll talk about Psykers in a little bit. But the Warp is essentially a twisting, churning, immaterial plane that's full of the worst nightmares and most horrific creatures that the galaxy has to offer. The Warp is fueled by the emotions and actions of the galaxy at large. And because of this, in a galaxy of endless war and suffering, the Warp is a nightmare realm of horrors for anyone who are to travel through it, or if the Warp is to ever push into real space. Now, we'll talk about a bit why the Warp is an absolute necessity for the Imperium of Man, but just understand that right now it is essentially Warhammer 40k's version of Super Space Hell. Right? Let's talk a little bit about Psykers. Okay? Psykers are people who can draw on the power of the Warp for psychic ability. Right? This is essentially, in the Warhammer 40k universe, magic, okay, for lack of a better term to kind of understand that. They don't call it that, right? You do hear sometimes sorceries, followers of Tzeentch will call it sorcery. We'll talk a little bit about that a little later. But they call it psychic ability. Okay? And human Psykers, Eldari Psykers, anyone who can use psychic power draws on the Warp. Okay? This, of course, yes, makes it incredibly dangerous as it opens them up to demonic possession. Okay? Now, why the Warp is so critical is because the Imperium requires it, actually all species except the Tyranids, but don't worry about that right now, or the Eldar, require it to travel across space. It is their equivalent of light speed from Star Wars. It is their equivalent of Mass Effect relays from Mass Effect. It is their equivalent of warp drive from Star Trek. Okay? But instead of all those having like really neat scientific things behind them, in Warhammer, it's just tear open a hole in reality and fly through space hell, okay? Which is essentially what they have to do. And you might think, well, if it's just a reflection, like the materium, wouldn't it be the same amount of distance if you have to travel 10,000 light years in real space? Would you not have to travel 10,000 light years in the warp? Not quite. The warp is really, it's very kind of abstract to try and wrap your head around. But also time, we're not going to really get into time because it's insanely complicated. But a good way to think of it is the warp is essentially timeless. Okay? You could be in the warp for 20 minutes and have 20 years pass in the material realm. Okay? Or you could be in the warp for 6 weeks and have 6 hours pass in the material realm. Okay? Time is incredibly convoluted and doesn't really make much sense at all in the warp. Okay? But because it's so strange, it allows for this kind of travel. Okay, they do need specific people to help navigate through the warp, and they are guided through the warp by the Emperor's light. And we're going to touch on that very quickly here because, again, it is quite complicated, which is why I'll link other videos below. But we're just trying to get a very basic understanding of it today. Okay? So they've tear open a rift in space, and they've gone through space hell. So how do they get through it? So basically, the ship is guided by the light of the Emperor and his astronomicon. Okay, there are very, very special psychers on board every ship called navigators. Right? And these navigators have the psychic ability to perceive and interpret the astronomicon and see the light of the Emperor in the warp. And this guides them through it safely to their destination. Now, that's not to say that sometimes mistakes are made. They definitely are. Sometimes things like warp storms, which are just storms of warp energy, can block their sight and get ships misdirected, okay, and lost in the warp. But that is generally how they go through. Okay, navigators are extremely important to the Imperium because if they did not exist, they wouldn't be able to use warp travel, and the entire empire would collapse. Okay? They have special navigator houses. Navigators have very special, highly protective areas on the ship that even the Space Marines don't go to. Okay? They are of the utmost value to the Imperium. Okay? They'll also have, in terms of communication, astral paths. So you have navigators who help find the ways that ships are going through the warp. Okay? And then you have astral paths. Okay, which use psychic ability to send communications across the galaxy. Now you might be saying, okay, well you said the warp is this crazy, terrifying hellscape, so how does the ship physically make it through that safely? Well, these ships are equipped with massive psychic shielding. Okay? All of the ports so that you could look outside a ship are closed. Okay, they don't need to see, right? It's the astral path that's guiding the ship. Okay? And they have basically these psychic teardrop balls that go around the ship that protect them from chaos invasion. Now, this does not mean that you can stay in the warp indefinitely. Okay? Even with all this protection, passengers, or I shouldn't say passengers, crewmen and those on the ship can still experience hallucinations, visions. They'll have terrible nightmares. Okay? And should that shield drop for a moment, chaos will invade the ship. Okay? You really don't want to spend long in the warp. It's very important the navigators find the quickest and shortest path through it so that they can reach their destination. Alright, let's talk a little bit about the warp itself and chaos. Okay, so the warp is the dominion of chaos, and chaos exists because of humanity and the Eldar. Now, we're not going to get in too much about how the Eldar contributed to chaos, okay? We're really just going to focus on humanity right now. But basically, the warp, like I said earlier, feeds off the energy in the galaxy. Okay, because the galaxy is just full of endless war, suffering, famine, disease, pestilence, depravity. Just basically, the universe is a horrible nightmare, and an endless one at that. Chaos is the same, or the warp is the same thing. It is a turbulent hellscape, as I said before. And there are 4 main chaos gods that we're going to touch on. So the first one we're looking at here, now this isn't specifically a picture of him, but these are demons of Khorne. Okay, we're going to start with the most straightforward and go to the more abstract. So Khorne is probably the most straightforward to understand in terms of the Chaos Gods. He is the big red dude with wings and an axe. Most likely, he most looks like demons you see in a lot of other media, right? Kind of like the Diablo demons or the devil, this sort of thing, is very much Khorne. He is the blood god, the god of skulls. The more violence there is, the more happy Khorne is. Okay, the worshippers of Khorne want to be endlessly in battle. They endlessly thirst for blood and brutal murder. Okay? This is what Khorne is all about. Okay? The servants of Khorne, the word bearers, who were one of the original Astartes legions who fell to chaos, became the world eaters and followed Khorne. He is also the one with the famous saying that you may have heard before, blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne, is the war cry of Khorne. Okay. Now, what's important to remember here about chaos and the chaos demons is that as humanity in the general galaxy has fallen further and further and further into basically hell, you need more and more and more to catch the attention of the chaos gods. Okay? It is not just as simple as, oh, Chaos is really interested in this one dude because he murdered some dude. You know, Khorne doesn't really care about that. What Khorne cares about is genocide, right? If you have a planet that's just drowned in blood from billions dead in some sort of fight, Khorne's gonna love that. Right? That is what they care about. Because you have to remember, on a galactic scale of trillions of souls in the galaxy, they're not going to notice small things anymore. Now, there are theories that state that, Khorne may have mattered a long time ago, may have taken more of an interest back in old Earth, where, you had like a primitive age where one murders another. But now, at this point, that's no longer the case. It is some believe that it is stated that Khorne first gained consciousness in the warp, or at least self-awareness, after the first murder happened. Okay. Another quick thing I want to touch on about the Chaos Gods and time in the warp. There was no first or last Chaos God. Because time is so tricky in the warp, it's best to think of them always existing at all times. Okay. They were always there, they just gain consciousness or self-awareness at different times. Okay? Alright, let's move on to Nurgle. Okay? Nurgle is or sometimes known as Grandfather Nurgle, is the plague god. Okay? The god is the god of rot and decay. Okay? The Death Guard, Astartes Legion, fell to Nurgle and worship him exclusively. Okay? Nurgle, he got the name Grandfather not because he was the first, but because of the care and attention he takes to those who worship him, inflicting them with special plagues and rot, and how much care he gives to his followers. Right? There was once a convening between a space marine of the Death Guard and Nurgle, who had taken his victim and constantly gave him horrible boils and bubbled his flesh down to a putrid mass, and then reshaped him, and then gave him more diseases where his bones cracked and his blood boiled and his skin mutated and malformed, cracked and chipped off, and he melted into nothing, and then he reshaped him again into endless agony just so that he could converse with one of his Astartes leaders. And the Astartes watching this was almost jealous of the gifts that Nurgle had given this poor individual. And this is the plague god. They are generally depicted as fat, pustuling, their innards are hanging out. They are probably the most grotesque of all the Chaos Gods. That's Nurgle for you. Right? Next, we're going into the little bit more abstract. Here we're getting into the Chaos God Slaanesh. Now, a lot of people hear Slaanesh and they think, oh, the sexy time Chaos God. Where that is partly true, that is not the true essence of Slaanesh, okay? Slaanesh is better termed a god of excess, okay? A chaos god of extremes, of obsession, okay? Really good real-world examples, if we were to use our modern day, is Slaanesh would absolutely love the stalker serial killers of our world, okay, who absolutely obsess over one person. Like the movie Fatal Attraction would be a really good example. Patrick Bateman would be a really good example. Another one would be in the news when you heard about those people when World of Warcraft first came out and they died of malnutrition because they were just playing the game so much. That is what is truly Slaanesh's bread and butter, right? It is the darkest obsessions. It is your addictions and giving into them, okay? Slaanesh would be all over heavy drug users, alcoholics, these sorts of things. And yes, of course, sex addicts would be one of them, okay? Like lust and pleasure is all a part of Slaanesh. It just can go a lot deeper than that, okay? These are really good instances that show how Slaanesh can corrupt, okay? She can offer whatever someone truly desires, whatever they really want to possess. Slaanesh can offer that and seduce them with that, okay? It was the Emperor's children, Star T Space Marine Legion, who fell to Slaanesh and coveted her exclusively. Okay? So just remember, Slaanesh, a lot of people like to jump immediately to, oh, the sexy time god, where chaos god, where yes, that is correct, but it's not the whole picture, and a lot of people only like to focus on that. Slaanesh is very much, again, the goddess of excess. She is obsession. She is the purest forms of ecstasy in however you might find that. Okay. Next we have the most abstract and the final chaos god, Tzeentch. Tzeentch is a chaos god of change, sometimes also known as the changer of the ways. Okay? He is a chaos god of knowledge, of growth and mutation, where Nurgle was very much the chaos god of stagnation and decay. Tzeentch is the complete opposite. He is the chaos god of 1,000 schemes and 10,000 machinations. Right? Tzeentch is one of the chaos gods. No one truly knows what he looks like. We have multiple reports of those who have potentially met Tzeentch and lived to tell about it. They always look different. Right? Tzeentch is a chaos god who is truly hard to really pin down. Okay? Everything is working into Tzeentch's schemes, okay? To the point where it is said that potentially not even Tzeentch knows everything that's going on. Because if he did, and he ever reached his ultimate goal, then there would be no more need for schemes, no more need for plotting, and Tzeentch would no longer need to exist. It is said that Tzeentch reached consciousness when the first human politics came into account in society, and there began to be nobles scheming against each other, is when Tzeentch came into the fold. He is also chaos god of sorcery, right? And that dangerous knowledge. Tzeentch demons are usually depicted as birds or fish, or even these pink fleshy horrors, okay? So Tzeentch, think of him as knowledge is the best way to think of it. We could talk for a long time about Tzeentch. He is very abstract. There's a lot of really cool stuff about him, but we just don't have time to go into that. So we'll quickly sum up here, okay, before we move on to the Horus heresy and a little bit more about how chaos operates, is that we have Khorne, the blood god, Nurgle, the god of the plague, we have Slaanesh, the god of obsession, of excess, and we have Tzeentch, okay, god of power, of schemes, of knowledge. Okay? And let's talk slightly a little bit more just about how chaos operates and the warp before we really get into Horus and the Horus heresy, which we'll be talking the most about here today. Okay, so again, chaos has the ability to infect the mind of any psychers. Okay, but psykers are necessary within the Imperium. As I said before, they are navigators, they're astral paths, and they're within the ranks of the Astartes as librarians, or they could just be powerful psykers in general. The Inquisition has them as well. Okay, and 10,000 psykers are sacrificed every single day to the Emperor to sustain him on the Golden Throne with their psychic power. Okay, so the warp is critical to the Imperium's survival, but they also have to be very, very careful, because a possessed psyker could tear through several Astartes squads before it's finally brought down. Okay, these things are incredibly powerful if you have a psyker who gives themselves over to chaos and is possessed by them. Okay? There's a lot I could go into there, but just basically know psykers are absolutely needed, but also incredibly dangerous, and every psyker, every human, is technically vulnerable to the seductions of chaos. Okay, but chaos really only takes interest in the more powerful ones, those that they feel they can benefit from. Something I like to mention too that's quite important about chaos is that they don't actually really care all that much about the material realm. The most important thing to the Chaos Gods is what they call their great game. And basically this is something they do between themselves and even other demons of the warp, and it's basically just them trying to all have dominion over the warp as a whole. And the only time Chaos really comes in to deal with the material realm is when they think it can benefit them in some way in their great game. Okay, so it's not like Chaos spends all day just looking for humans to possess. Okay, they've got their own stuff going on. Okay, so let's talk about Horus and the Horus heresy. Okay, this is without a doubt the largest event in the Imperium and the one that matters the most. Okay, so I'm going to try and go over it as precisely but also as loosely as I can. Okay, again, like I said, in the description of the video, you'll find links to much more in-depth analysis and stories about the Horus heresy, which I highly recommend you check out. It's super, super interesting, and the battles that happen are just absolutely wild, because it was full of Astartes legions, hundreds of thousands of Astartes, thousands of Titans fighting each other, just insanity. So Horus was the son of the Emperor. Okay, Horus was the closest to the Emperor, so after the Emperor unified Earth and started the Great Crusades, Horus was the first Primarch found. So him and his lunar wolves set off with the Emperor, and they fought side by side for a long time. Okay, many, many, many years as the Emperor crusaded across the galaxy with his first son. Okay, and every time they found another Primarch, Horus was quick to befriend them. Okay, he wanted to learn as much as he could about them, and tried to be the best friend he could to them. Okay. Unfortunately, this all turned sour after a huge fight on a planet where they took down an orc war boss. At this time, pretty much all the Primarchs had been found, all the Astartes legions were brought together, and it was here on this great conquest at the edge of one of the edges of the galaxy that the Emperor declared that he, in front of everyone, as a shock to many, in front of a whole armies, the Imperial army, all the Primarchs, much of the Astartes, all of the Mechanicum that was there with the Titans and other military equipment, declared that he was returning to Terra. He was no longer going to lead the Great Crusade. Okay? And that Horus was to be the War Master in his stead. Now, this was significant for a few reasons. Okay? A big one being that Horus felt abandoned by his father. They had been fighting side by side for years and years and years, and he was always under the understanding that it was they who were going to conquer the galaxy along with his brothers. However, this was not the case, and he was kind of blindsided by this, felt like all of a sudden his father thrusted all of this responsibility on him, and he didn't really understand why. Okay? He was also given the title of War Master. Okay? This put him above his brothers. Right? And as he continued to lead the crusade, he felt this pressure of this position more and more. There was some infighting between some of the Primarchs, and he didn't quite know how to handle that, or at least he thought he wouldn't have handled that as well as his father would have. Okay? And so Horus felt ever more paranoid that his brothers were beginning to mistrust him, that they didn't believe that his battle plans could lead them to victory. Okay? And this paranoia started the whispers in Horus' mind from chaos. There are a few other very significant events, okay, that turned those to chaos. Okay, specifically, there was the Emperor chastised the entire Word-Bearers Legion, burned their capital city to the ground because they were preaching the Emperor as a god, where the Emperor strictly had the society be a secular one. Okay, the Emperor, you have to remember, had lived since, for as far as we know, the beginning of humankind, and had seen the destruction that religion had brought, and in his mind, society would get along better as a secular society, and so he never wanted to be seen as a god. And so seeing the word bearers, which is one of the Astartes legions, were preaching the word of the Emperor as a god, he chastised their entire legion and the Primarch on their home planet when he raised their capital city to ash. This kind of shake in their faith drove them to chaos first, the word bearers. Now again, I'm skipping over a lot of details. You're going to be like, wait, all of a sudden this is happening? Again, if you want to know more, highly suggest I check out the videos, okay, that are posted below. But yes, basically the word bearers were first. There was specifically one captain in the word bearers who set up an audience unbeknownst to Horus with the Chaos Gods, who showed him visions of the future, that the Emperor would lead them down a dangerous road, when in reality these were visions that would come to pass if Horus turned to chaos, which of course he did. Okay? The Horus heresy raged for about 7 years, okay, across the galaxy. Horus burned an innumerable amount of planets, hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of Astartes died, and millions, if not billions, of guardsmen and innocent lives. Entire planets were burned, apocalyptic battles against titans were waged across planets. It was a beginning of the end of the Imperium. 9 total Space Marine legions fell to chaos out of the 20 of them. Okay. However, critically, 3 of the largest and most powerful legions did not. And that would be Rabute Gulman and the Ultramarines, Sanguinius and the Blood Angels, okay, and Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists. They did not turn to chaos. And this was very significant. Horus went through extreme lengths to make sure that when he went on the siege of Terra to try and finally hand over the Emperor to chaos and become the new ruler of mankind, that the Ultramarines and the Blood Angels and the Imperial Fists were not there. However, despite all of his efforts, the Blood Angels were there, the Ultramarines were not. Again, I know I'm going really, really quick here, but there's just so much, and these are kind of the key points we need to focus on. Okay? So Horus rampages across the galaxy, okay, and he begins his siege on Holy Terra, okay, where he is going to kill the Emperor, hand him over to chaos, and take control of the Imperium in the name of chaos. Okay? During this assault, tears in the warp opened up, chaos demons spilled out into Terra, and an enormous battle across the planet raged, specifically in the Imperial Palace. Now you have to remember at this point, Terra is essentially just one giant city planet, and the Imperial Palace covered nearly a third of the planet, okay? It's massive. So the Blood Angels, as I said, were there, and they managed to stem the tide, or at least hold them back long enough for the Ultramarines to arrive. Okay? Lots of stuff happens, okay? Again, I know we're moving through this really quickly. But basically, what happens is that the Emperor goes onto Horus's ship, along with the Primarch Sanguinius, a few of his custodies, which are basically his personal guard, to challenge Horus. Okay, they teleport over to his ship. Horus lowers his warp shields. He says, alright, let's just finish this. Okay, so basically, they all get on the ship, okay? The Emperor, Sanguinius, some of his custodies. But Horus uses his power to scatter them throughout his ship. Okay? So none of them are together. And Horus starts to stalk the halls of his ship, looking for his father. However, he first comes across the Primarch of the Blood Angels, Sanguinius. Okay? Now, Sanguinius earlier on Terra was engaged in a massive battle with a demon of corn, and he was able to slay him, but only due to great injury to himself. So he was tired, he was injured, but he still stood against Horus and fought his brother. Horus, of course, killed the weakened Sanguinius, but not before Sanguinius could score an absolutely critical blow against Horus, leaving a chink in his armor. The death of Sanguinius, however, was felt all across his legion, and the fault in their gene seed, called the Black Rage, came into effect, and all of the Blood Angels Astartes on Terra flew into a violent rage where they could not stop themselves and slaughtered anything in their path. After Sanguinius lay dead on the floor at the hands of his brother Horus, the Emperor found him and could not believe the fact that he was seeing his son, the War Master, who he had fought alongside for so long, confided in about so many things, had fallen so far to chaos. All the chaos gods were within Horus. He felt all of their power. The Emperor, however, still thinking that his son was in there somewhere, could not bring his full strength to bear against Horus. And it is because of this that in their battles they exchanged psychic blows that the Emperor was mortally wounded and nearly lost the fight. Horus held the shattered body of his father above him, and right before he could deliver the final blow, the Emperor realized that his son was lost, summoned all of his strength, and hurled a psychic bolt directly at the chink in the armor that Sanguinius had made. It was at this moment, when the Chaos Gods knew that Horus would die, that they left him. It is said that Horus finally saw the error of his ways before his death, and not only his physical body, but the blast from the Emperor was so powerful that it burned Horus's soul from existence, meaning that when he died, soul would not return to the warp, and the Chaos Gods could not resurrect him. Basically, Horus was erased from all existence. The Imperium has never recovered from the Horus heresy. Okay? It is from here that there has been now a significant fear of Psykers in the warp, even though they are necessary. Okay? It is here that Rabute Gulliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, wrote the Codex Astartes, which was basically a set of rules for Astartes to follow, and also set forth a limit that the Astartes legions were to be split up into significantly smaller chapters of only 1,000, so that if one of them fell to chaos, it would not cause such catastrophic harm once again. Here we have Horus killing Sanguinius. The Emperor now sits on the golden throne. His lifeless body was carried here by the Custodes, and he was hooked up to the golden throne. It is here where he keeps the Astronomicon lit, okay, so that the Imperium can travel through the warp. He also keeps a certain gate, his secret project that he was working on beneath the throne room called a webway gate, closed. Okay, so something he was working on. I'm not going to get into it too much. Basically, the Eldar use the webways to travel around without needing to go through the warp. The webways, really quick cliff notes here, are basically a realm between the warp and the material world. Don't worry about it too much right now. The Emperor never got to complete his project. Demons tried to pour through the webway gate, but there's nothing they can do to destroy it. It's too dangerous, so the Emperor sits on his golden throne to keep it closed, as well as like the Astronomicon, so the Imperium can travel through the warp. Okay? And this is where he is confined to, where 10,000 Psykers are sacrificed every single day to keep him, the corpse Emperor, alive, barely, on the throne. Right? So I know that was a lot to kind of cover, okay, and understand. And again, it's going to feel like I kind of really rushed through that. But the important takeaways are the following. Okay? The warp is the immaterial realm opposite to the materials realm. It is where the gods of chaos and demons reside. It is where all Psykers draw their energy. It is how the Imperium of man gets around the galaxy. Okay? And it is also how they communicate through the galaxy. Okay? Through the astral paths. The other important thing to take away is that the Horus heresy, essentially for all intents and purposes, killed the emperor, and he sat him on his golden throne, and because he was not there to lead, the Imperium descended into grindingly slow bureaucracy, became incredibly xenophobic, and over time, worship of the emperor became the dominant religion in the galaxy, and they are now basically a ultra-religious group, the humans, to their emperor. Okay? It is said that if the emperor were to come back, he would be horribly disgusted at what the Imperium has turned into. No one really knows, though, to be fair, what the emperor's plans were for humanity. The last thing I want to mention is just a nice little anecdote to really understand just how grindingly slow and bleak the Imperium is after 10,000 years of the Horus heresy. This happened around M31, and we are now in M41. Is that you have the Adeptus Administratum, okay, which is basically like, think of it like government administration, okay. You would have them potentially a member of the Administratum sitting at their desk. They're going through requests. They come across one where they are requesting imperial aid because they are under attack by some Xenos threat. They're being slaughtered by the millions. They're suffering horribly. People are captured. They need immediate help. And they could see that this request was made 10 years ago. Well, too late now. Into the fire it goes. On to the next request. Okay? This is kind of one of my favorite anecdotes of the Imperium. It kind of really shows just how brutal and just grindingly slow the Imperium is, and how it's sunk so far down, and how bleak it can be. Okay. As always, if you have any questions, post them in the comments below. I'll always read them. I hope everyone enjoyed this and kind of somewhat understood what was going on. Again, like I said, you can check out the description below where I'll post some extra content that you can kind of watch. They're much more longer form. They go into much deeper detail, so I definitely suggest treating them like a podcast. Listen to them while you work out, this sort of thing, okay? And I really hope you enjoyed it. The next video I'm planning to do is going to focus on a lot more stuff for the game, though I do believe that the warp will come in significant, and chaos will come in significant play in the game. We're going to start touching on the Astartes, how they operate, their gear and equipment, kind of go more in depth into that, as well as the Ultramarines and why they're so significant in terms of fighting the Tyranids, and then after that we'll go into the Tyranids. Okay, and then that will kind of wrap up our basic lore videos to get ready for Space Marine 2. I did also, as well, download some free video editing software. I hope to make much more interesting and kind of bring my videos to life. So the next one might be a little longer. But stay tuned, I've got some really exciting things coming. So thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a little something. And we'll see you in the next one.